Good evening, and welcome to Conversations Around the Diocese, a program brought to you by We Are the Church. Please note that the views expressed here are solely those of the speakers and do not represent that of the Anglican Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. Our conversation this evening will be facilitated by Monique Castle, a member of the Cathedral Church of St. Diego de la Vega, Spanish Town. Now, sit back, relax, join and enjoy the conversation. Remember that together we are the church.
We start our conversation for the evening. Our panelists lined up for today are Professor Verene Shepherd, Mr. Gavin Miles, we have Reverend Dr. Michael Clarke, and Professor Veront Satchell. So let me introduce our panel and get the conversation going. Here we go. So Professor Verene Shepherd, OD, is a renowned Jamaican academic and has a long association with the UWI. Professor Shepherd is an advocate for reparation for slavery, and she is currently the director for the Center for Reparation Research at the UWI. Mr. Gavin Miles is a community development specialist from Belfield St. Mary. He's a proud Garveyite who is interested in building a strong community of Africans who understand that we can make the world better together. Reverend Dr. Michael Clarke comes to us from Barbados, and he currently serves as the principal of Codrington College. That's a theological college in Barbados. Professor Veront Satchell, also a son of the soil, comes to us from Kingston. He's a graduate of Kingston College and also the Michael University. He is he has done varied research, interrelated research spanning land tenure, peasant development, slavery and technology, landscape history and religion, and social protest. So, my brothers and sisters, friends who are joining us, our panelists will have much to share with us as we engage in the conversation. The church, slavery, and reparation. I say to the ladies and to the gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Great. So we begin our conversation with the rose, shall I say, the rose. Professor Verene Shepherd, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, it's good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And so we begin. The church, slavery, and reparation. There has been much talk of late about reparation and the moves that are to be made, the intentions, and then there are some who have made some rather, let me put it diplomatically, some rather caustic comments about reparation and the idea of it. So it would be good to hear your take on the matter in this space.
Okay. So do you want me to begin now? You want me to share my presentation now?
Yes, go right ahead, please.
All right. Right. Thank you so much. I start with an observation made by the formerly enslaved woman, Mary Prince, who endured slavery in the Caribbean, later taken to the UK, freed, and became a part of the emancipation movement. This is what she said. Since I have been here, I have often wondered how English people can go out into the West Indies and act in such a beastly manner. But when they go to the West Indies, they forget God and all feelings of shame, I think. since they can do such things. They tie us like hogs, moor us up like cattle, and they lick us so as hogs or cattle or horses never were flogged. And yet they come home and make some people believe that enslaved people don't want to get out of slavery. That was a Mary Prince. Among these enslavers who brutalized the enslaved were those who professed Christianity and worshiped in the various churches across the Caribbean. About 5.5 million Africans were trafficked to the British colonized Caribbean from the 17th to the 19th centuries, approximately 1.5 million to Jamaica alone. In 1834, just 800,000 remained, leading many people to call that genocide. Once in Jamaica, the enslaved Africans were governed by many laws, among them those relating to Christian religious instruction. Apart from sporadic ventures by the Quakers, no serious conversion took place until the late 17th century. In general, planters did not think that the African was of theological significance and opposed any religious instruction among the enslaved, especially as it might have stimulated ideas about equality and increased resistance. So to paraphrase historian Elsa Gavaya, early English slave law almost totally neglected the enslaved as a subject for religious instruction, as a member of a family or as a member of society possessing some rights as everyone else. On the other hand, as the potential of religion to decrease resistance and promote obedience dawned on European settlers, the Jamaican Assembly began to think differently. In 1696, they passed a slave code which stipulated that enslavers should instruct Africans in the Christian religion, facilitate their conversion, and fit them for baptism. This instruction was rarely carried out in the early period, when only the Anglican and Catholic churches were present in the island. Indeed, a high fee was imposed on baptism to discourage the practice. The English were reluctant to see the African as a person and struggled with whether they should apply the laws of England to the Caribbean. If they did, then they would have to acknowledge that once Christianized, the African could not be enslaved. To ease their minds over that conundrum and to protect their economic interests, they commodified the enslaved as property outside the family of human beings. Anglican planter historian Edward Long, who wrote a 3-volume history of Jamaica published in 1774, opposed the admission and baptism of Africans into the Anglican Church, as that would have been tantamount to bestowing upon them the status and rights of British citizenship. After the abolition of the trade from Africa and the arrival of the nonconformist churches, who did not share the views of the Anglicans against widespread conversion, more laws were passed against religious instruction, especially if it was to convert Africans. The consolidated slave laws further provided for the whipping and imprisonment of Africans found preaching and for the closing down of meeting places between sunset and dawn. Yet this was the only time the African was not working. The Jamaican legislature also passed an act authorizing the governor to deport any person from the island, including missionaries, suspected of inciting behavior that would disturb the peace and order of the society and to prevent preaching by persons not duly qualified by law. The law was eventually disallowed by King George III, but in the meantime, Baptist and Methodist missionaries were refused licenses to preach, and some were imprisoned for having preached without due authorization to do so. Still, slavery was largely accepted by the establishment, especially the Catholics and Anglicans. Early opposition within the Vatican was spasmodic and had little effect. The leading philosopher priest of the Catholic movement in the Caribbean, Bartholomew de las Casas, politicized the idea that protecting the so-called Indian meant the trading in Africans. This, he said, was a part of the natural and divine order of things. He later publicly denounced the trade and expressed regret for the role he had played in the development, but the Spanish continued the practice. Despite these laws and actions, various religious denominations were active among the enslaved, mostly in the areas of education and religious instruction. In terms of chronology of arrival, the first nonconformist evangelical missionaries, as opposed to the Anglicans and Catholics, to arrive in the Caribbean were the Quakers. Then they were followed by the Brethren, the Moravians, the Methodists, and of course the Baptists. Congregationists or Calvinists followed. The Presbyterians arrived around 1814. It was not until 1823 that, as part of the amelioration strategy geared at improving the lives of the enslaved, promote a stable non-revolutionary society, and delay emancipation, that the Anglicans undertook any serious efforts to proselytize among the enslaved. Members of the Anglican Church remained the largest enslavers in the Caribbean. The church is said not only lent moral support to thousands of enslavers within the British Empire, but its missionary agency, the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, owned dozens of enslaved people on Codrington Plantation in Barbados. The bishops ran the plantation, and the Africans on arrival were branded SPG on their chests with hot irons. In 1834, Anglicans were among those claiming monetary compensation for the loss of their property, including Henry Philpott, a bishop of Exeter, who received over £12,000 sterling. And only the evangelical wing of the church later took a stand against slavery. Now, the enslaved also learned well, many of them became preachers, and when they were going to be baptized, they were interrogated. And I just want to give you a quick snippet of one such interrogation. It went like this: Minister, well, Thomas, do you know who Jesus Christ is? Thomas, him the Son of God, Minister. Minister, what did Jesus Christ come into the world to do? Thomas, him come to save poor sinners. Minister, do you think he's able to save sinners? Thomas, me know him able. Minister, how can you know that he's able to save? Thomas, because he met the world, and if he met the world, he's able to do all things. And minister not tell we often time this make him left him father throne and come into this sinful world. Minister, what is necessary for us to know and feel before we can love and serve God as we ought? Thomas, we must know and feel truly that me is a great sinner, never do one thing good since me born, before me can serve God in a right manner. And there were many instances of this. As the campaign for abolition intensified in Britain, the evangelical clergy, men and women, particularly the Methodists, came under even greater suspicion, prompting Methodist missionaries to reaffirm that they were not part of an anti-slavery movement. The Moravians also appear to have accepted the status quo. So did the White Baptists, so did the Presbyterians and the Methodists, leading Dale Bisnoff to say, he pointed out the hopelessness of any attempt on the Christian enslaved people's part to resist the authorities and the law, and advised them that whatever others might do, to go quietly and peaceably to work, and their salvation would come in heaven. So getting to the end, some of them did take part in the anti-slavery activities, but mostly from a far distance in Britain, because they would have been oppressed had they done so. We know of Smith in Guyana, who was imprisoned and then died. So there was some humanitarianism, but the Baptists were in the forefront. And in fact, in the 1831-1832 Emancipation War led by Sam Sharp, most of the enslaved Africans were native Baptists, not the other British Baptists. I want to come now just to say something about compensation and then reparation before I close. Now, when the Emancipation Act finally was passed, it came with a compensation package. A total of 46,000 enslavers were compensated to the tune of 47 million in 1834, 20 million in cash borrowed from the Rothschilds, and representing 40% of the national budget at the time, and 27 million in free labor for another 4 years, down from 8, then down from 6, because of the opposition to the idea, through the scam called the apprenticeship system. And as some of you know already, the loan was not paid off until 2015, the year former UK Prime Minister Cameron came to Jamaica and told us to get over slavery and move on, that it was too long in the past. It wasn't, because it was 2015. Among those who received compensation were members of the clergy, numbering some 100 in Jamaica, like the Reverend Charles David Trelawney, and a past principal of Wolmer's Boys School, who claimed compensation on enslaved people he owned in Manchester. I think he owned about 356 enslaved Africans. According to the research from the University College of London, there were some 96 Anglican priests who who owned enslaved people and received recompense under the 1833 Slavery Abolition Act. And collectively, this group received a payout equivalent to 46 million pounds in today's money. The injustice of compensation for enslavers, but not for the enslaved and not for the descendants who continue to live with the legacies, is at the center of the reparation movement. The modern churches, which unlike their historic counterparts are more interested in restorative justice, should add the reparation fight to other causes. As Professor Hilary Beckles pointed out recently in one of his talks on reparation, where there is right, there must be remedy. And injustice without a remedy is abhorrent to the spirit of justice. We know that there have been statements of regret. We know that the Anglican Church issued a formal apology in 2006, and then again in 2007 and in 2020. The Church of England issued an apology for its role in slavery and the slave trade in June 2020. Again, the Presbyterian Church in the USA has established a $1 million reparations fund. Princeton Theological Seminary pledged $27 million as reparation for the school's historic ties to slavery, and others have come forward with apologies and some educational fund and so on. But there is not enough action, in my view, by the faith communities in Jamaica who really need to get on board on behalf of their congregations who are descendants of the victims and who continue to suffer from the legacies of slavery. The sermons are more mythically heavenly than realistically earthly. And the time is now for the CARICOM Reparations 10-point action plan to become a part of the sermons. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for that, Professor Verene Shepherd. That is an interesting introduction. And I like what I find most interesting is how you would have ended it. It is the sermons are mythically heavenly rather than realistically going to, well, Mr. Gavin Myers has not yet joined us, but I'm going to ask, let me see, Reverend Dr. Michael Clarke coming in from Codrington, that renowned place that was gifted and bears so much history, right? Dr. Clarke, Reverend Clarke?
Hi, Monique.
I'm going to invite you to come into the conversation.
I can see Gavin Myers. I can see Gavin Myers online.
Yes, he is.
Okay. Oh, Gavin?
Hello. How you doing?
Gavin, Gavin, you are here. Welcome. And you jumped in right in time.
Yeah, I'm here. But
great. Were you able to take in Professor Shepherd's start to the conversation?
I have been listening, and it's really good to be listening to both Professor Shepherd and Professor Satchell. How are you, Doctor? It's really good listening. I think the points that have been raised are critical. One of the things I'd like to raise, and I know both Professor Shepherd and Professor Satchell will speak more about this, is the role that the church played in post-emancipation in terms of their education role, not only in terms of reform, but also in terms of blocking reform and blocking real education for the newly freed Africans. And this is a part of the role that the church also would have to, in terms of their role as emancipation or emancipatory agents, speak about this. Because I think this is one of the critical roles that they played that still continues now as a part, and I am a part of this church. My great-grandfather, he paid to join the church. My grandfather paid to join the church too. And it's interesting that they paid to join this church and paid to go to school when the school and the church that they paid to join was not for them. So it's a part of this conversation that we want to bring in. We want to bring in the role that the church continued to play in terms of blocking real emancipation for the enslaved Africans, in terms of their role to provide solace and continued, heavenly protection for the plantocracy.
Yes.
This will,
and if you want me to comment on that, so I didn't go to the post-slavery period, so thank you for bringing that in.
I think that part is really critical enough because it continues, and even more, the coffers of the respective churches post-emancipation during at the time when the 20 million was paid over to the planters, a good portion of this went in as donations to respective churches and to these respective church organizations and schools. We have to remember this, both in the West Indies and in England at that point. So a lot of the money that was given off actually came back to the church, and the church used this as a part of their support, and their legislative and the members of the church use this legislative power to block changes. So it's a critical, I think it's a critical moment that was discussed, that political moment that the church exploited, for want of a better word, and what it did with the power that it has. This is something that I know the church has to, in a lot of ways, accept and speak of, because it is critical in their own work on this place. Yeah,
you are right, and it was a project. It's a deliberate project in the post-slavery period. It was a joined-up approach by the planter class and the churches to suppress Africanism and to ensure that the freed people did not have independent thought in terms of how they should live their lives in the post-slavery period. They had their ideas, of course, so there was always tension, but they ensured that the education system instilled sexism, the male as breadwinner ideology, patriarchal ideology, hegemonic masculinity. They pushed that women should stay at home, and these are women who used to work before. So there was a deliberate effort to suppress the revolutionary instincts, the Africanism, culturally and through the education system. And we have been struggling for a very long time to rid ourselves of the Eurocentrism that they put into the education system.
And if we want to look at the education, and we have to accept that the first universities and colleges that came about in the Caribbean were Anglican institutions, St. Peter's College, and we'll talk about Cadrington College and the work that Cadrington College has done over the years. But if you look at all of the early schools, I speak about Queen's College, the Manning's School, the Rossies, or the Woolmers, all these schools that came about pre-emancipation, all of them had most had some connection to the church. And the established church, which wanted to keep the status quo. And this keeping of the status quo
anti-black racism
continued even in terms of the education acts and the structures that were done and continued.
Yes. And they tried to erase culture. When Indian indentured workers came, the Scottish Presbyterians, the Quakers, the Anglicans, all of them began to descend on the Indian people to ensure that they got rid of their names and they got rid of their culture. And that's what we're seeing in Jamaica, especially. The renewal of migration in Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname changed that dynamic. But especially in Jamaica.
The church, however, was a cultural arm of the oppressor. There's no doubt about that.
That's why I'm saying the planter and the church the missionaries join hands.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
The planter class was Anglican anyway, most of it. Hamilton Brown. Take somebody like Hamilton Brown, who the whole of Brownstown named after.
Yeah.
Who had to burn Baptist chapels and tried to suppress the revolution led by Sam Sharp. He was Anglican, and he was a part of the colonial church.
Yeah.
Okay. This is certainly coming into an interesting and very robust conversation, and we thank you, Gavin, for joining in. I see Professor Satchell, you wanted to add something to the conversation just now?
No, I'm just listening because I have my presentation to make. And I just
You
like
have
to
your
hear what everybody
presentation.
says first, and then
Okay.
yes, it's nice
Okay.
to think about
Wonderful.
all of these things. Yes, thank you.
Right, and process
Can I make
it.
one point?
So,
Just
Gavin, you wanted to say something, make a
yeah.
final point? Okay, great. And then we will invite Reverend Dr. Michael Clarke to come into the conversation.
I think
Go ahead, Gavin.
another part of our challenge as a church, and I say our, because another part of our challenge as a church and as a society with reparations and emancipation is how knowledge about our history and our past has been pigeonholed. That some persons don't think it's something that we should know, and something that it's something that it hurts us to our core, but we're almost afraid to speak about it because, you know, the Bible says we should not. It actually is wrong for us to have a relationship with either God or others that is built on a lie or built on a fear. So one of the things that I find in a lot of our church relationships with our history is this reluctance to openly accept that our church has not been a positive agent in all of this, but rather has been actively blocking and removing its people from real emancipation. And a part of the reparation that our church has to be involved in is this open conversation. This, you know, I'm going to bring in now, I'm going to say Professor Canon Ernest Gordon's concept of, you know, just burning out the roseberry fruit psychosis and actually having an emancipatory concepts. That's where we have to move towards as a church. And sometimes I don't think our church is ready for the conversation or even more open to actually doing after the conversation.
Thank you for that, Gavin. And I am just inviting our viewers to put their comments in the space and put their questions in the space at this time, because some very interesting points have been put forward. Gavin, you have been very pointed in what you just said a while ago. I'm going to invite Reverend Dr. Michael Clarke, Principal of Codrington College, to come into the space at this time. Reverend Dr. Clarke?
Hi, good evening, and thank you very much.
Good evening and welcome.
It's indeed a pleasure.
So you have heard the conversation thus far unfolding, Dr. Clarke?
Yes, I have.
Good, good. And it would be good to hear what you would have to put into the space.
Certainly. Well, the only non-Jamaican in the place. Obviously, we come from a different place in many regards. It's interesting. As I listened to the conversation thus far, and I hear the points that are being made. There are points that we all can say, yes, this is a reality. But even as we engage in this way, I think that it's important for us to really explore really and fully that which is beneath it all. And the last speaker, Gavin, made this point about relationships built on a lie. And I think that's where I would like to begin. Relationships built on a lie. And a similar point was made also by Professor Shepherd, where the point was made as she was quoting that dialogue between the minister and the slave or the enslaved person about to be baptized. And he had this to say, me a sinner from the time me did born, never did one good thing in my life. Now, yes, we're talking about slavery. Yes, we're talking emancipation. Yes, we're talking about reparation. But the forum that we are in this evening is we are the church. And for me, the issues that we as church need to deal with are far deeper issues than just simply the reparation, or at least looking at what reparation really means and how broad does reparation go or need to go. These two quotes that I just offered speak of a lie, a fundamental lie. And it challenges the church, we who are the church, to ask ourselves, do we still propagate this fundamental lie about the fact that I've been a sinner from the time we were born, right? We've got to look at these. We don't have the luxury to just simply talk about whether there's enough funds to come in because of compensation, etc. We as church don't have that luxury. We as church took something that was called the way, a movement of love, a movement of building community, and we institutionalized it, right? And I say we because of the collective we. And as we institutionalized it, we then came to understand that the institution was of far greater importance than the movement. And it was the institution that left its shores in different places and crossed the Atlantic Ocean to take away lands from the Native Americans, lands from the Arawaks, the Caribs, as they were called. So it is not something that simply began when Africans crossed the Atlantic. It is something that the church was part and parcel of from the time the institution became what we know it as. And so if we, as the church, as we say we are the church, if we're going to have a conversation this evening or any other time about these matters, I think we need to go back and challenge our own very existence and ask ourselves, how are we showing up in the world today? When the quotation from the enslaved man can probably still be heard by persons as they seek to make their baptism. These for me are the fundamental issues that we have to deal with. As one who is responsible for theological education in the church in this region, these are things that I myself have to wrestle with on a daily basis, because we continue to perpetuate a mindset that as much as we may want to look back and talk about and make apologies for, the question is, how deep is that apology going? Have we dismantled the system? One of the biggest fundamental realities about the European church, especially the British church, that we need to understand is that the British church has, by its very nature, been organized in the form of a chaplaincy. Before the British church left England to come into the Caribbean, it was a chaplaincy. There was the chaplains, the Queen, the manor, the Lord of various manors would build a chapel on the manor, and he would invite, not invite, he would say that the person, he would call a priest to live it. And that priest, therefore, would go to be the priest on the manor, and he would basically look after the so-called spiritual needs of the peasants that were on the manor, being unfeared by the Lord of the manor. And his role was to keep them subdued. We are often told, I remember as a youngster in a history class back at school, being told that it was on this occasion when the church service was taking place on the manor, in the chapel, that the Lord of the manor and his family in their private box would have the newspaper delivered to them so they would have something to read during the sermon. We need to understand the fundamental makeup of what we've called church and what we have accepted as church, and realize that if there was a lie, there's a lie, and lie is ingrained in the methodology and everything that flows up. So therefore, if we have this kind of model in existence before it leaves its shores, what do you expect when it is not dealing with a community that is like it? What do you expect when there's a difference in the shade of the individual? What do you expect when, like everything else in the human race, we know that in order for one person to in any way abuse or injure another, the individual has to first dehumanize the person. Classic case is the experience of Rwanda. I mean, in order for one group to be able to do anything to the other group, they had to perceive the other group as cockroaches. Having made them cockroaches, you can then kill them. And so when you take the African and you make him less than a human, you can do whatever you want with it. And the church bought into this. And therefore, these are the issues for me that as church, it becomes seriously important for us to converse on, because we need to ask ourselves if anywhere within our structure, there is still the remnant of any of this life. Even a sinner from the time he did born, I may never do a good thing in all my life.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Clarke, for your contribution to the conversation. Gavin made mention of, and Dr. And this is coming from a sermon I had heard on Sunday, in terms of how we struggle to treat someone as equal. And so Professor Shepherd had mentioned it, that the English, they struggled to identify Blacks as humans. And so, and because of that struggle, we were treated the way we were treated, right? But at this point, you know, how do we as a church now begin to turn that around? How do we as a church now begin to recreate and refashion the mind of our people? And when I say we as a church, I'm speaking specifically to the Anglican Church, because we know the role that the Anglican Church played in slavery.
Can I? So, all right.
Wow.
So there's a few things in my mind on this thought that you just raised.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first started reading the Bible and started trying to understand things, I immediately knew that my God wasn't a God that was a colonizing God. My God couldn't be a colonizing God. My God couldn't be one who came down and saw somebody somewhere and took the land and said, this is, I immediately knew without reading any further that that could not have been the God that was a God of me, the child of former enslaved Africans. That could not have been my God. But I also knew that at the same point, the communion that I was a part of could not be a communion that enforced that as a part of their teaching. So in bringing this conversation that we have out now, I don't want us to make it, I'm sorry to use the word, make it light. I don't want us to make it light that the Europeans did not know that they were dehumanizing people. They knew. It was a deliberate and exact science that they were using. They were using all facets of their history, their science. They were using everything. So similar to how they were using everything to do that, as a part of our Christian, our human principles, as a part of our humanizing, smadification, to use Prof. Chevan's concept here, as a part of our smadification, we really and literally, Prof. Nettleford, we literally have to come on and remind ourselves and remind everybody, so we're human too. And this human is accepting us as we all are. We hear how we worship, what we do, where we go, where we are, the soil, the earth, the air, everything about us. because in a lot of ways, we have preserved some of our buildings beautifully, but we have not preserved our culture. We have not used our culture as much as we needed to. So as a part of this work that we need to do, these are some things that we have to do in terms of the reparatory movement we're talking about. So the reparatory movement is this whole activity, this whole new creation, this whole thing where I said, we as a church are a free church. We as a church are a church of people who are from this place. All of we who are from this place. Majority of we who are in this church are from the bowels of the enslaved Africans, but all of we come from here, all of we belong here. And until we start that, our church is going to dwindle. I mean, when I say dwindle, I don't mean just physically dwindle, I mean spiritually dwindle.
But Gavin, how much of the reparation campaign is known in the church and is taught there? And because reparation is part of that theory of justice, which the church, I think, would call restorative justice.
Yes.
And liberation theology allows that conversation to be included. But how many of the preachers inform their churches about the 10-point action plan? We start with apology, then it goes to the Indigenous Peoples Development Program, repatriation for those who require it, the building of cultural institutions, attention to the public health crisis, African Knowledge Program. Some churches don't even want to talk about Africa. Psychological rehabilitation, technology transfer, debt cancellation.
So
how much
I could say,
we want the churches to talk about as well.
That is.
I would say, okay. I would say that it's on the tables in the church, but I am not certain that many clergymen themselves know of this 10-point process. And that is something that's a fault of ours, that many clergymen do not make themselves or become aware of these things. And as such, they are not able, not being aware of, not knowledgeable of, they cannot pass it on, they cannot bring it out in their sermons and so on and so forth. So we are left in a no-go. That's where we are.
And yet there are people around who you can invite to educate your church.
Indeed. There are some clergymen who will do.
And have been doing that. I have been to several of the churches.
Yes. But there are some clergymen who are not, either that they are not too aware or they are not interested. And that's the problem that we have.
They don't see the relationship between what they are preaching and practical project of developing and getting rid of the poverty of our people.
And that is what that is what I hope to talk about.
Okay, so I won't say anything more about that.
No, please.
Prof. Satchell, up at Woodside, you know, when I went up there that day, I was surprised. And you know, Woodside is one of our churches. Yeah. Woodside is also one of the churches that I think maybe around 5 people are there.
Yeah.
But Woodside is also a very important thing in terms of the same things where Prof. Shepherd just spoke about, and also some things that I know you have done.
You have Nana Bradbaugh there anyway.
Exactly. Yes. And Nana Bradbaugh is one of our church. And Nana Bradbaugh work, it speaks about the sociological and historical lineage that we own as a part of this community. When Nana Bradbaugh talk about, when I found out that the church up there is the remnants of a great house. I mean look at the church at different way, I hide. Yeah. But in looking at the church at different way, I also recognize another thing that was being done, that a little boy was able to talk to me about his church and his community. Children were able to talk about his church and his community and the sociological understanding of where they were coming from.
Yeah.
So we as a Sunday school, and me put a plug for Church of St. Mary the Virgin and the work that is being done there. We as a Sunday school are able to talk about where we're coming from. It's a reminder, say, it can happen if we actually take a chance and actually start learning. So it's not something that is foreign. It's not something we're hard to do. But if we take a chance and try to learn it and try to do it and feel it and know it's a part of us, when we school them learn it, when we school them know it. Case is a different school altogether. We can separate Kingston College in terms of how them approach to knowing the history from I'm going to Monique, don't beat me up. I'm going to separate KC from Beckford and Smith or from St. Jago in terms of this. But we, in a lot of ways,
We'll go right ahead. We understand the history.
Yeah, we understand where we're coming from and understand how it is that we have to use the church and have to use the education system as an emancipatory process. We have to do that.
Yeah.
By the way, some things were Manning's school.
That's where I want
Manning School said something that they
wanted to take it, Gavin, because you had Gavin, you had said that the church is blocking real emancipation, right? Yeah. And here it is that Professor Shepherd mentioned the 10-point plan, which is something that I did not hear of and I have not heard of in my church.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah. Professor Satchell has now brought it into the space to say that perhaps there are some clergy leaders who are not necessarily off faith with it or may know how to speak to it to the congregation. But I think it is now high time to get on this road to this version of emancipation, because we're a part of the church. And I mean, being a part of a church means that there is a concept of freedom that we are supposed to have. There is a concept of freedom. Prof. Satchell?
Have a concept of economic empowerment for the people. Yes. A concern about the SDGs, which taught a number one SDG, which is supposed to be realized by 2030, is ending poverty in all its forms. Well, you can do that without good education and employment and decent, jobs, decent pay. I'm saying that in my experience, the church, many of the churches they're over here with one thing, but the real society over here with another thing. And I want to read just quickly another dialogue. It's not long. The minister, it ties in with the same thing we're talking about, that it's almost like when conversion takes place, and this is still the case, it's like I must put down stuff, take on some other stuff. And what has been intergenerationally is putting down the culture, putting down things about Africa. So the minister says to the candidate, do you have a new heart? The candidate said, "Me hope so." Minister, what makes you think you have? Candidate, because what me love before me hate, what me hate before me love now. Once me love precious Master Jesus, who peeling precious blood for me poor dying sin. Those kinds of concepts,
Right.
Coming from way back.
Thank you very much. And I like the trend of the conversation. I am going to invite Reverend Garfield, our social media correspondent, to come into the space at this time. Reverend Garfield?
Hi, Monique.
How are you?
Good evening to the panelists. I am doing well.
Great.
And to our viewers.
Well, great. And to our viewers, the conversation has been going for a while. And I am sure that our viewers may have some questions and some comments of their own to field to our panelists.
Yes, we do. We have some questions here. The first one to Prof. Shepherd. Prof. Shepherd, you gave an overview of the benefits the Anglican Church received from the proceeds of slavery. The Anglican Church in Jamaica and Barbados, and no doubt other parts of the Caribbean, are wealthy landowners, own large amount of land in their respective countries. What do you think the Anglican Church in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean can do to atone for our role in the enslavement of our people and the plunder of our resources, i.e. the use of land and does that dovetail into any kind of the reparations demands that are being made? So I'll leave that for Professor Shepherd.
You deal with that now, or you have more to raise?
Yeah, I have more to raise. One for Father Michael. Mr. Myers speaks about full and real emancipation and the church not facilitating that as it ought. And Father Michael spoke of the fundamental lie and enslavement of people's minds and perhaps souls based on the comment made from the enslaved person that Professor Shepherd quoted, and which echoes the phrase perhaps made popular by Bob Marley, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, which speaks to a freeing of the whole person. To Father Michael, how does the church, the Anglican Church in the province of the West Indies, change this kind of a narrative to bring about full emancipation of our people? What really should we be changing or doing differently in our teaching and in our preaching? So I put those two out there. Prof. Shepherd can go first, and then Father Michael.
All right, well, the thing is, I don't know of big gestures by the Anglican churches in the Caribbean towards reparatory justice. In other words, I don't hear, I know they're involved in education and looking about the spiritual life of people. Some of them are established charities. They help the poor in more practical ways. They establish boys' schools, children's homes, and so on. But I don't hear them doing what the Anglicans in other jurisdictions are doing. And let me remind you of what I had said before. Now, the Church of England issued an apology for its role in slavery and the slave trade up to June 2020, but they have not gone any further than that. And an apology has 3 dimensions. An apology takes responsibility for a harm done or engagement in criminal act. It commits to non-repetition, and it commits to repair. And the 10-point plan remains the blueprint for what those who were involved and who got benefits from slavery, what they should do. I told you that the Presbyterian Church in the USA has established $1 million reparations fund. Princeton Theological Seminary pledged $27 million as reparation for the school's historic ties to slavery. The Episcopal Theological Seminary in Virginia has allocated $1.7 million reparations fund. The Episcopal Dioceses in Maryland, New York, and Texas have created reparations funds. The National Council of Churches in the USA support the HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans. And the Memphis church leaders have called for nationwide slavery reparations. The Jesuit Catholic priests have committed to raise $100 million for 5,000 descendants of persons enslaved by the church to address this shameful history of Jesuit slaveholding. What I'm saying is this: I don't see the Catholic Church and the Anglican churches who were complicit, their antecedents, complicit with slavery, coming out, even when people say disrespectful things about our ancestors, like the outgoing High Commissioner for the UK in Jamaica, calling our ancestors dead people, and we're not paying any reparation for dead people, and it's too long ago in the past, and all these things. Who apart from the few of us at the university, who comes out to defend our ancestors? The only church person I saw commenting on that was someone from the Catholic Church who seemed not to care and to take into consideration what he ought to have said to the UK High Commissioner. You know, so we need an army of activists from the churches and from other sectors to be there as lobbyists, but also committing land and committing funds, because the Anglican Church benefited. You heard me say 96 Anglican priests got compensation. And even some of the schools that have been started with money from enslavers do not even know their own history. They haven't changed their names from Manning. Manning was an enslaver who left enslaved Africans to work, to contribute to the school. And one indigenous person, one Taino woman. St. Jago has a responsibility to come forward and act. Wolmer's, you know, so the Anglican Church needs to do a lot more. It's not just about staying in church and preaching. They need to join the reparation movement like the others in other parts of the country. And the bishop in England must do more, because what they're busy doing in Cambridge, for example, the Anglican Church in Cambridge is trying to defeat the reparation movement of Jesus College, one of the colleges of Cambridge. They want to remove the name and plaque of Tobias Rostat. They are going to give back the Benin bronzes, but the church that is run by the Church of England trying to defeat this process. So
that brings to the point.
Yeah.
That brings to the point in the rift. Sorry, Prof. That brings up point that we have to acknowledge that the Church of England, as it was then, as the established church, and the church, the Anglican Church in the province here, have come at apart in our ways on several things. Whilst our church has started to make feeble steps, the only steps that the Church of England has been taking on this have been backward steps. And I say it without any I'm yet to be...
I would love it to write that in the Gleaner.
Yeah, I'm yet to be proven wrong. So the first and foremost thing that we need to remember is that these monies that these churches and these organizations got in Jamaica, in Barbados, in Antigua, were brought back to our good old England and our All Souls colleges.
I'm glad you said that, because you were talking as if all the money they got came back to the churches in the Caribbean.
No, I never meant it that way. If that came across, no. Our All Souls colleges, our Cambridges, our Oxfords, these colleges got significant.
Yes, absolutely.
And then if we want to talk about in Scotland, the Dix Trust.
James Dick, yes.
James
Dick, not Dickinson, the James Dick.
Dix, yeah.
Dix
Yeah.
But we cannot deny that the church has been very active in terms of education. And you can't deny that. But the question that is asked, is what type of education? I think the quality of education, that's what I want to talk about. The cultural bias within the education system.
Exactly.
And we must recognize that the Anglican Church came to the Caribbean as a chaplaincy to the English.
To the plantocracy.
To the English. Enslaved persons are here, but they did not see them as persons capable of being Christianized. And that's something we have to recognize. And as such, being the cultural arm, it would be there steeped in that ideology. It would be hard for it to really consciously come out of that, because that was what it was. It was ingrained in the church, and as such, that's what it was. The question was asked, I would say more on that, but the question was asked, what about the land distribution after emancipation as a part of compensation to the enslaved persons? Of course, the church, the laity and clergy benefited tremendously. As I said, nearly 100 clergymen benefited. They got compensation. Many of them had hundreds of acres of land. They could have, in good gesture, as means of compensation, subdivide that and make it available to the hundreds of slaves who labored on their estates. I don't think that even came to the minds of the church leaders. because they were of the central view that blacks cannot fend for themselves. There is a civilizing mission, this white man's burden, and if blacks should get land, or they should become independent of the plantations, they're going to lapse into barbarism. And so that was a general ideology. And whether it be Baptists with their free villages, or it be Moravians, the same ideology persists, that the center of the free village must be the church, the culturalizing agent, the cultural agent of colonialism.
Cultural beacon.
Yes. So therefore, you cannot empower Black people to be independent of the plantation. And the church endorsed that, the part of the establishment. It endorsed that. And that was, maybe I want to say, the white man's view. And so it isn't surprising that they did not subdivide the massive land that they had. Today, the Anglican Church has almost none of the land it had before, because it has lost it to squatters. What a thing if it had subdivided them to the enslaved persons, the thousands that they had enslaved. So that's part of when it started to discuss reparations, we have to consider sustainable development as such. Many people talk about money, monetary compensation and all of that. If it's monetary compensation, then that should go into structures, invested into sustainable development, education, healthcare, infrastructure, transfer of technology, job training, and so on and so on and so on. And that is where we need to go as we can contemplate what can our church do. And I agree with Professor Shepherd that the church needs to be more proactive. It can't be business as usual. Since 1870, this church has been an independent church, independent of England. But the church has remained aloof of the people. It has not identified as much as it should with the people. And that is a problem that we are facing today. I don't think we are being empathetic enough. Yes.
If I may I, and I am glad, Professor Satchell, that you are making mention of this. And I just wanted to ask Reverend Dr. Michael Clarke, as the principal of Codrington College, how do for priests at the role of the church in our society now? Is it so much, do we remain guardians of an ancient kind of bastion that keeps us suppressed, or do we change the thinking now, the whole training of our priests, and not just the training of our priests, but the whole role, the overall role of our church? And I mean, this is something that I'm even going to query if it could not be done on a diocesan level and at the provincial level.
I think, and your question connects with the question that the person asked on social media about the change in the preaching and the narrative. And obviously this stems from the training of individuals, and not just the training of the individuals, but even more so, it stems from what concept or what view of itself does the church want to have. And as I listen to the conversation, I can agree to a large extent with a lot of being said, but at the end of the day, one has to really remember the pathway. And I think sometimes we forget our roots. It's the same way that we speak of the importance of knowing one's roots. People without roots, people that go nowhere. It's like a tree without roots. Sorry, people without a knowledge of its history is like a tree without roots.
People with tree without roots.
And I think that the same thing needs to be said for us as church now, not even just, not church in the Caribbean, not church as it relates to the enslavement of the Africans, but church as church. I think this is a fundamental thing, and this whole conversation that is taking place now in our world gives us an important opportunity to look at what the narrative of the church needs to be. And my response to the first one, the question is that the church needs to go back to its basics. The church needs to go back to the basic understanding of what church is. We have operated as an institution, and every institution has to find ways to sustain and maintain itself. And that model, that institutional model, is what it is that is causing us not to be able to fully engage. Because, for example, you ask yourself, okay, so there's a church, and the church is swithens by the sea up in some community somewhere. And we ask ourselves, who is the church? And everybody says, well, the people of the church. Okay, so the people of the church, but yet they're saying that the church is not identifying with the people. Now, that makes no sense. You can't say the people of the church and the church does not identify with people. If the church is not identifying with people, it means that the people are not identifying with themselves because they are church. So if the people are to identify with the church, with themselves and with church at the same time, then obviously those who lead church and those who understand what church is need to go back to the Jesus model and recognize the centrality of the person over against the institution or the order of the day. And that's the fundamental issue that needs to be dealt with as church. All the other issues that you're raising are important, but I'm talking from the perspective of the church. The church has not addressed the fundamental issue as to what it means to be the church. And then we have to ask ourselves, when we say the church, are we speaking of an institution or are we speaking of a way of being? Because we kind of interchange the word Christian and church here and there, but they're two different things. And I think that this whole experience really and truly is opening up the opportunity for us to look at this, even within the context of this COVID pandemic, where we cannot physically go to that place that we call the church. And it is creating some tremendous challenges for many of the leadership of the church, because there is that desire to have persons back in the building. And you ask yourself sometimes, what is that desire about having people back in the building about? And oftentimes it is about the whole idea of making one's church, making one's payments. And that's a serious situation within the context of church. So the narrative needs to be changed. And what is the narrative? The narrative could only be the narrative that our Lord Jesus Christ offered us as he walked through Galilee and built the church as the place where people engage in relationships and in understanding of themselves and as perceiving of themselves as the children of God, not as sinners who have been sinners from the time of their birth. That's erroneous. Jesus didn't bring that message. And until we can clarify that message, we will continually be faced with the call to defend something that is undefendable.
We cannot defend it. We cannot defend it.
We cannot defend that. Man.
We cannot defend it. We cannot defend it, and we're not even trying to defend it because we acknowledge that the church is an institution, and the church of the body of Christ have all failed.
Yeah.
We have failed.
But Prof. Satchell, do you believe that the institution, the institution of the church is what has a stranglehold on the neck, really, of the called out people of God, the body of Christ? Because we only understand church in its institutional form in this 2021. But how can we then, should we then not try to change the institutional form in which we exist? So for example, in the whole movement and the call and the struggle for reparation.
Yeah.
How is it that the church in the province of the West Indies, don't you believe that we have a responsibility to lobby the Church of England in these Lambeth conferences that we go to, in these
That's what I was asking.
that's
Garfield, right?
in all these
But
don't we?
Garfield, you can only lobby the church in England when you have an understanding for yourself as to what church is. But if you still perceive yourself as an extension of the Church of England, and not, even if you call yourself whatever you want to call yourself, but if you still perceive of your own sense of purpose and function in the same manner as the rest of the communion,
Reverend
then what are you going to lobby?
You can't lobby yourself if you don't say you're different.
So
if you don't say your church is not the Church of England or Church for England, if you don't say you're the church for Jamaica, for Barbados, or the people of where you are, then you can't say that you're an emancipated church. If you're not an emancipated church in your own self, you can't go to nobody else and talk to them about.
But the question is though, do you consider our church as it is now an emancipated church?
That's the question I want to ask. Do we consider the Anglican Church as an emancipated church?
What do you mean by emancipated? Emancipated from what? Emancipated from the culture that we have invested in.
The Anglican Church, the Church of England, I'm talking about the Church of England. We still are steeped in Church of England practices.
So
we're steeped in
but hold on. It's not easy for us to move out of that. But the point is, if we are part of that Anglican communion, then we conform to aspects of that communion. But that does not mean that we cannot develop within our own culture and society that makes us a part of. And so as the question that you asked, Father Michael, when you go to Lambeth, what are you going to ask for when you yourself don't even know who you are? So here's a situation in which we need to know ourselves.
Right.
We need to become more versed, more immersed in our culture, develop.
Right. Now, one of the challenges that we face,
yeah,
and a very significant challenge we face, is that when we came to embrace church, we didn't understand that the way church is made up. Church has two significant components. One is a theological understanding, a way of understanding God. And the other one is the culture in which that particular institution exists.
Exactly.
So there's theology and there's culture. And the thing is, unfortunately, you can't even separate them really, as I just tried to do, because in your theology is informed by your culture to a large extent.
Exactly.
Now, we didn't understand that. So when we embrace church as we have received it, we embrace a theological understanding as defined by a cultural sense of who a particular person was. In other words, we embrace a Eurocentric view of God.
Yes.
And that was given to us, and that's what we've called church. We keep hearing these days the phrase, the global village. There's a fundamental thing about the global village. The global village is not a place where everybody's the same. The global village is a place where you come and you take your seat. You can only take your seat. If you come as somebody else, there's no seat for you because the person that you're coming as is already present. So if you don't know who you are, you can't find your seat at the global village. The Anglican community is a very rich community. It's a very rich engagement. It's a beautiful engagement. The problem with it is that we don't understand that when we go and we sit at Lambeth, we're supposed to be sitting in our own seat. What does that mean? It means that we represent to the world that ethos, that Anglican concept that is immersed in an understanding of a unique people in the world. Recently, USPG had a conference, and one of their bishops, they were making presentations, and there was a bishop from an African country. I wouldn't name the diocese. And in the process, there was a little interview between himself and a member of the congregation. And he was saying to the member of the congregation, you could see it was staged, but he was saying, you know, this is our church, you know, we have no problem with Anglicanism. This is our church. We are good. And then he said, you know, then the young man said, but you know, the fathers of old had a problem. He said, no, but we don't have a problem now because this is our church. Now we own it. And what I heard from that short engagement was not that it was our church, but it was when the young man said, the fathers, the persons, in the initial folks, that when the church came in, those guys had a problem with it. That's what I heard. Because what that said to me is that over the centuries, indoctrination and dehumanization has so taken place that they now perceive of themselves as something different, whereas their forebears perceive of themselves as valid human beings who had a culture of their own and an understanding of God as of their own. But over time, through education, they have eroded that. And now what they have now, they're happy with it because it's no longer theirs. It is theirs now because they're no longer themselves. That's why it's theirs. And all this talk about various universities who are giving scholarships to the Caribbean people, you got to be careful with that, right? Because what you might very well be doing, where the scholarships tenable. So you're in Barbados, you're in Jamaica, and you benefit from one of these scholarships, and you are invited to come up to England to be able to study in the same mindset as before. Perhaps we should be asking that these funds be made available so persons can study in African universities, so they can have that sense of their history. So it's not just a matter of persons just giving them money. There are deeper fundamental issues that I think we need to address. And the church needs to address some of these issues about who am I as church? What does it mean to be church within the Caribbean context? What does that mean? What does it mean?
My question is, excuse me, first of all, I don't know if you were referring to what I was talking about, the actions of the various churches, because in the US, they're giving scholarships to their own people in the country. It's not about coming down to Caribbean people and so on. They're trying to look at where the church was responsible, complicit, and doing something for African Americans in those communities and societies. So the second thing though, my question would be, how was the church, however you interpret it, how has the church helped to shape the consciousness of people of African descent in the Caribbean? How has the church in its visualization within its space helped to empower people as they come into that space? Is there a white Jesus still there?
No.
How have you, well, I don't know because I don't go to church, so I don't know what you have. I'm just saying that once ago, I used to, if I go to a funeral or a wedding or something, I actually look to see what is there. But, you know, that's just for some of the places that I go to when these functions.
I wanted to bring that in.
But yes, but when you have Sunday school or whatever it is that you have in the liturgy, what are you teaching, and how are the issues in the society? How do they factor into the conversations in the church? Are you teaching about equity? Are you teaching about equality? Are you encouraging, you're talking to leaders to say history education must be a part of the curriculum? Because if history is not a part of the curriculum, the people who get scholarships and they go up to England, they don't have any defense against what they're going to be taught. People like us, when we got scholarships to go to the UK, we were fully formed human beings ideologically. They couldn't push anything down our throats. And we could go to the archives ourselves and see what was there. But it's a different generation going to England now with no ability to defend themselves ideologically because of what the absence of history education They are walking around as people without any grounding, and they literally what the church is telling them.
But if I can answer the question then, because not knowing the Jamaican context. So you have come through the Jamaican context. You have come through the Jamaican education system, which was informed heavily by the Anglican Church at the time. And you would have a strong ideological mindset that was able to sustain you when you did your engagement. But you're concerned now with the fact that our young people don't seem to have that. The question is—
It wasn't the church, Reverend. I wasn't influenced by the church whatsoever.
Pardon?
I wasn't influenced by the church. When I went to the UK, my strong commitment and knowledge and ideology was shaped by the University of the West Indies, with lecturers like Professor Kamau Brathwaite, Elsa Govaya, and people like those. It had nothing to do with church.
Right, but what? No, I'm not saying it. I'm just asking. I'm just trying to trace something. So my question is, what has happened in Jamaica now at the University of West Indies that this has disappeared?
So
I'm not talking about Jamaica alone. It's right across the Caribbean. Only very few people students do CXC history.
So with the compartmentalization,
it's not encouraged. It's not stressed.
It actually has been disencouraged.
Yes.
Disencouraged.
Yes,
because you need steam and all of that.
This is something
because we don't serve them well. When you are a grounded person, Garveyism, when you embrace the philosophy of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I, when you read certain anti-colonial texts, and when you are
the church and the leadership,
you are too revolutionary to be in the society. So they discount history as a project. I believe this is just my idea, nothing to do with
I want to bring
history last, and that's the situation.
I want to bring the role of the laity here. And Sunday school, I teach Sunday school. I'm an active Sunday school teacher. One of the things that our Sunday school does is engage us in conversation and engage us in learning about our service and ourselves as a part of a change agent. And it's critical that we look at and we'll talk about the iconography that is there. A lot of churches are embracing the iconography that is more, let's call it emancipatory. Well, a lot of us younger persons in the church are embracing the iconography. But I think part of the challenge that we have now is that it is disjointed. It's not spread across. And even more, I learned about the liberation theology through, and you're going to talk about, when we talk about it, this Souza. We talk about Canon Garden. We talk about these persons who were activists and saying, look here, Gomez, who said emphatically that the church has to be for and of the people. But what you find though is that we have not actively done enough to share this across the space. And I think that's where we need to do more of. Where we need to—
Gavin,
yeah.
If I might put, Gavin, that is why I was making the point that it is very difficult to now at this point try to separate the church, the called out body, the people of God, from the institution. Because in order to have some of these things really spread across, because individual congregations, we can preach things as individual clergy. We can introduce things into the liturgy which might not earn the favor. For example, the list that Professor Shepherd compiled of those who were sentenced by courts martial and civil courts for fighting for emancipation, 1831, 1832. That's the list out there. Some of us might say, let's use this and let's call these names. Let's remember what they have been through. But until we start to get the institution to move and to change, the broad-based kind of a teaching that we are looking for, so our Sunday school curriculum, how we do liturgy, how we understand theology, the kind of curriculum that we use in our theological institution. Father Michael is into theological formation. What is it that we're teaching? How are we preparing and training? The school, the church has lots of schools. How is it that we have a Department of Education? How is it as a diocese that we lobby our schools and say to them,
proactive?
Yes, history should be a compulsory, Caribbean history, compulsory subject, all the way up to CXC, CSEC level.
So I can't say how we're going to do it.
But we have to lobby the institution, the leaders who lead the institutionalized church. Because when we want things to move in a particular way, we move it. The institution will move it.
But if history hasn't got any value added to the leadership, the government, the authorities, it's not gonna get any traction.
But there is a value added in a Prof.
We know.
Let me put a value added.
You and I know that there's value added. But do they perceive that there's a value added? That's a big question that we need
they run to historians every time they need to give an emancipation speech and an independence speech.
Every time they want to.
They run to historians.
It's almost as if you are seasonal, right? It's almost as if you are seasonal. Our history becomes seasonal.
When we need
so
you,
it is
we
around
call you.
emancipation and independence.
Yes. So when we need you, we call
around
you.
emancipation and independence.
And we put you back in the closet.
I don't want your slogan.
Right. And so this is one of the issues that I have, because if as a church we are going to engage in a whole scale education of our people, it cannot be at a time as August 1 and August 6 only.
And October 23.
Yeah.
As Gavin had pointed out, and as Garfield had pointed out, it has to be something that is infused. It has to be something that is infused. So if we look at the list that Professor Shepherd had even posted in her article on Sunday, when you're looking at this list, we're not only supposed to be calling the names of these people and remembering them at August 1 and August and other names at August 6. These are people who are an inherent part of us. They're an inherent part of our history and our legacy. They're an inherent part of how we came to be emancipated.
Yes, we have to see them as part of our family, you know.
Yes, exactly.
You think there are some slaves, quote unquote slaves out there that we're trying to tell them not to say slaves, to say enslaved people, because somebody did this to them.
Yes.
My great-great-grandfather, Alexander Mighty, I have traced that, born into slavery in 1829. So it's personal to me. On my mother's side, people from Cameroon. It's personal to me. This is not
exactly
some object I pick up or something disconnected. I'm just a professor, and therefore
haphazardly at a specific time.
You're a person, you're somebody.
But our Sunday schools, and I can use an example. I come from St. Mary. I come from St. Mary's Church. Right?
Right.
So let's talk about it in terms of that foundation. Several times when we look at the names of the people who are in the community, we can literally trace and say, okay, this family, this is a Hibbert family, this is a Campbell family, this is a Hall family. We can trace that.
Enslaved family.
And it's the Hibberts who enslaved the people on the
enslaved family.
On the plantation where my father later on bought a piece of land and we grew up. It's the Hibberts.
Yeah.
So when we went to Woodside, I went up to Woodside and I had some young people. Some young people look at the wall. You know, Woodside has a wall. And I said to them, okay, let us look. And I said, look for your name. They're not able to find their last name, but they were able to find repeated first names.
First names, yes.
Because people remember first names to come true. So when we have a Sunday school, I talk to people in our church. We have these history. One of the things that we have to do as a church now is actually come and digitize and allow people to search their history in such a way that they can understand. So look here, you're not disconnected.
But here's a counter to that. Just give me 1 second. The counter to that. There's a monument in Montego Bay with all 600 and odd names there who were punished with sharp in that 1832 Emancipation War. Somebody went there and saw his name, Darling, I think it was. And he called me and he said to me, but I never know my family was Buguyaga.
Oh, Jesus.
Exactly.
You see,
That's the culture we're part of.
Yes,
That's how we are
yes.
deculturalized.
Yeah.
So
Because these
when you
people
if there
were
are, and you
rebels.
see, that's the view,
Yes,
the
they were
view that
rebels.
you have, right? So, and Gavin pointed to that earlier. If it is that we, and Prof. Shepherd, you spoke to it as well. If we go against a supposed grain, we are seen as outcasts. We're outcasts,
Yeah.
and we are rebels. Rebels without
So
a
you
cause.
talk-
Why are we
So you talk
upsetting
about
the status
rebellions.
quo? Exactly.
So you talk
Exactly.
about rebellions rather than liberation war.
I mean, where's the voice of the church
Right.
when women are oppressed? You can't wear sleeveless here, you can't wear sleeveless there. When Rastafari children are trimmed by the police, like in 1864,
Outrageous.
where are the voices? I'm saying I want to hear the church in the society, not just on a.
the church can't disconnect from the society, you know.
It shouldn't. It really shouldn't.
And we as a people, you know, we talk about our work to save souls. But the greater part about the work what the church are doing, especially in a COVID time, one of the things that the church has been doing is ensuring that the people are connected. And we're going to do more of this. Because the church, during COVID, the church has done more, you know. The church has done more outreach.
It is reaching more people.
It is reaching more people. So the connection.
And this is why it is important that we become more proactive in day-to-day current affairs and start.
How is it reaching more? Excuse me. How is it reaching more people?
By virtue of the virtual Zoom platform.
I see. I thought you meant you're looking about their welfare more.
No, I was talking about that part now.
It is also doing that too, but it is doing that, but it is reaching more in the message. It is reaching more people, and that is why I'm saying it can become much more proactive in the society.
It depends on what message you're giving them. You can reach more people with the same kind of message and educating more people. That's all.
So,
granted, but it can become much more involved and more proactive in the life of the people, and that is what the church needs to do, to become more proactive in the life.
Yes, get them out, get them food, make okay, because COVID-19, this pandemic is showing up the inequalities in our society.
Within the society.
Yeah.
People are hurting, people are in need. And this is a social action of the church, I think. You know,
and is this where you see us moving, Reverend Dr. Clarke and Professor Satchell? Is this where you see us moving now, taking action as a church, as an institution, as a body, to reach out to our people this way? This is our way of engaging in and maintaining sustainability.
I think that COVID-19 has changed the conversation completely and somewhat. I think it has forced the church to reflect and reconsider it's well, not just the message. The message is there. You can't change the gospel. That's the message that you're proclaiming. But it has enabled the church to reconsider and to reflect on how it is meeting the people to whom it ministers. How is it ministering to them holistically in terms of not just in terms of the sermons that you preach, but meeting the persons where they are, ministering to their needs, their aspirations. In other words, becoming identified more with people, although you can't visit, you know, because of this the COVID restrictions. But at least it makes you become more aware of those persons whom you need to touch base with and to see how they are doing. And so the church, I think, is becoming much more empathetic as it is now. That's my view from where I see it. But of course, I'm only at 6 churches, so I can't say much about what's going on in the wider church circle. But from what I know is that the church is becoming a bit more empathetic
But Prof. Satchell, you have a wonderful position and platform. You're a
Yes,
historian
yes.
and you are a reverend.
Priest. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Historian, yeah.
Right.
A question
That's
a question for the panelists, the professors of history. Do you believe that the demands of reparation can be met without violence, or will be met? From one of our social media. And there's a comment for anybody on the panel then. Do you believe that the demands of reparation will occur without violence? And
they call it violence in different ways, right?
Yeah.
What Fernand say, you have to violently expel even the thought of the colonizer. And in his concept of violently remove, it doesn't never meant physical violence alone. It must say, you have to take out in every way the parts of the colonizer. And we have consistently, El Sagovaya and others have consistently said that things aren't given, freedom isn't given, it's taken.
All right.
So part of the thing is, I when I ask somebody for something that not due for it. Reparations is something that's due. So my discussion is with no one is whether reparations will be given or not.
It is something that you have to take. That's what you're saying.
My discussion with people is that reparations is due because of what they have done to us. My discussion is that we as a people have to acknowledge and accept that wrong was done, and the persons who did wrong should acknowledge actually move forward.
And restitution.
If that don't happen, then we're going to have challenges.
Right.
What happens
as a church? We have to accept that we have a role in ensuring that our people are prepared to tell others that wrong was done to us, and that we want them to acknowledge that. And
That's us as a church, Gavin? Are you saying that as a church?
As a church.
Okay.
I put another question in this space. When this is over, will it become a future topic at Synod, which is the highest decision-making body of the Anglican Church in this diocese, and also in Barbados, individual synod? Or after tonight, it is never mentioned in Anglican circles again?
I think I asked something along those lines, Garfield, earlier when I spoke about, the diocese, the different dioceses, as well as the province, because as a province, we share that common history.
Yes, we do. So is it ever mentioned again to the Reverend Doctors and Reverend Doctor and Reverend Professor?
You're asking us if it will be mentioned if it will be taken at Synod?
No, I am asking, well, the viewer is asking.
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
From a diocesan level.
Both you and both Professor Satchell and Father Michael have strong voices in their particular diocesan synods, yes.
Mm-hmm.
A few moments ago, you asked another question, and the question had to do with, someone said, we need to be able to proclaim and take a position. And, I think Professor Shepherd was making the point, now that we're reaching more people, are reaching them with the same message? And that's a very interesting question, because for me, I continue to make the point that while the reparations and all these issues from a historic perspective are important, there is a fundamental challenge for the church, and COVID is bringing it out if we are willing to see it. It is not just what the church does, when the church reaches out to people, etc., which is part of what the church does, but it is how the church understands itself. And that's where the challenge of this COVID pandemic is. How does the church understand itself? The church in past understood itself as a chaplaincy, and that's the reality of the Anglican tradition, that we have operated as a chaplaincy, whether it was a chaplaincy to the planter, or whether it was a chaplaincy to the enslaved, or whether it's a chaplaincy to the emancipated persons. It perceived itself as a chaplaincy. It was some place where persons went for whatever reason. the church was never perceived in recent years as a body that goes out, that engages, that liberates, that enables persons to understand themselves as children of the divine. That's not been our role. We have been in a place and people have come to us and we have told them certain things, they've sat there and then they go back up. And oftentimes that is the extent to which individuals engage with any thoughts about anything beyond the everyday work. The church needs to change that understanding. And the only way they could change that understanding is if we come back to the very gospel that we have and see how that gospel guides us in being the church in our world. We can't take the institution. We can't take the institution and just try to bend it. It's going to take eons to bend. I remember one Clarke looked at me and told me, Michael, that for anything to change in the church, I was dealing with young people. So anything to change in the church, it takes 20 years. I said, yeah, but in 20 years, my young person isn't a young person anymore. So it's not about bending the institution. It's about helping the institution to use the time, this current time in which so much is up for grabs. Every aspect, every institution in the world is going through a challenge. Every institution, including the church.
Right.
But the thing is, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get back to what you've been doing before? Or are you going to use this opportunity to say, well, listen, there have been some significant errors, right? Where did the error, what is the source of the error? It's not just the error, it's the source of the error. Because if you don't understand the source of the error, you will find ways to manipulate and keep moving forward. We've got to understand what's the source of the error. And we're not prepared to do that. And synod is not a place for that to happen, because synod don't do that kind of thing. People are more interested in what's the financial budget, right? Synods are not the places, right? There is a need for ordinary persons to challenge and to engage each other in trying to come to a deeper understanding of who they are, and then who they are in terms of being people of God. The church, if you start with church, you bring all the baggage, right? And you will spend eons trying to get past the baggage. The thing is, it needs to go into the power of the people. Who am I as a person? How do we help persons empower themselves and claim their power? You don't have to take it, it's theirs, right? How do you claim your power as a person, as a child of the divine?
Wow. Thank you so much for that.
If you could allow me, I wanted to go back to the question posed about whether it's going to be violent or whatever.
Yeah.
Like Gavin's point of view, it's the time to use violence to effect change, or violence in that physical way, taking up arms and so on, like our enslaved ancestors did for emancipation. I don't think that is a strategy now. The strategy has to be negotiation or a legal strategy or using the United Nations. So those are the three that are being contemplated. It's not an act of begging, it's a demand, because if I could just quickly highlight the justifications. Well, the Europeans, they were owners and traders of enslaved Africans. They instructed genocidal actions upon indigenous communities. They created the legal, financial, and fiscal policies necessary for the enslavement of Africans. They defined and enforced African enslavement and native genocide as in their national interest. They refused compensation to the enslaved with the ending of their enslavement, but they gave compensation to themselves. And finally, I want to quote Eric Williams here. When Eric Williams and other independence leaders went to the UK to negotiate for independence, they demanded a golden handshake, it's how people put it, a development, for development so that they could actualize independence economically. They were refused.
Yeah.
What Eric Williams said in the lecture, the student, West Indian Student Union in London at the time, 1960s. The West Indies are in the position of an orange. The British have sucked it dry. And their sole concern today is that they should not slip and get damaged on the peel. Powerful.
Yeah.
Yes.
1939.
Yeah.
people were, Arthur Lewis was talking about reparation. And from the 1960s.
It's been a long discussion.
Yes, and Sir Ellis Clarke was talking about the justification that an administering power does not have the right to enslave people, extract everything out of them, and
leave them with nothing.
Independence, just say, go and develop. With what? Right. So it's the injustice. We're talking about an injustice, you know, and a crime committed. And I think those are ideologies, and that's content and philosophy that align quite well with the church's teachings and philosophy. So I think that we have to press that it's all right. And even the reparation movement has become a 21st century big movement, you know. It's a big tent, and a lot of people are coming under this tent. I mean, we live to see at the level of the United Nations the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights mentioning reparatory justice. And we're in the decade for people of African descent. I wonder how many churches have been talking about that. We are midway into the decade for people of African descent. I actually sat in the chair at the UN to help to draft it. And it's kind of, you know, I'm a bit sad to see in my own country and my own region the scant attention being paid to this decade for people of African descent. You know,
and there lies the challenge, where we will go to the highest levels of our world and we make all of these various things, but the individuals that
when it comes down to,
they're not a part of it, because somewhere or the other we have lost that focus on the person, and we have focused on either the institution, whether the institution of slavery or the institution, whatever institution.
I don't accept that, Rev. I'm sorry, I don't accept that, because I'm not in any way saying that what you've done is not helpful. All I'm saying is that you yourself have just said to us that when you come to your own country, you realize that the state is not living up to its responsibility. The state,
precisely.
Because the United Nations is made up of 190 odd member states. When any resolution, declaration, or whatever is passed, member states sign on. They sign on to the International Convention on the anti-discrimination, the Declaration, Human Rights, the Durban Declaration. They all go to the UN and sign off, and they are expected. It's not the people who develop these things are expected to come and implement. We inform the people here, all people in the various countries, but the Caribbean, probably with the Caribbean, they don't see racism down here. They think that racism for the United States and the EU, right? What they have is classism, and it has nothing to do with
reparation.
Reparation.
That's a problem.
Did anyone see the Pure Country Emancipation Day message with the picture? Anyone of you saw that? I want to question
whose message? Whose message?
No, not that message. There was a social media advert from one of our companies.
No, I wouldn't see that.
With the kneeling enslaved person?
No, it had a nice collage, and the colors were, let us just say, bright.
Well, what was it saying?
The absence of melanin was pronounced.
Oh, okay.
And this
I don't think I saw that.
I never saw that.
No, I didn't see
saw
that.
it. But
didn't see it either. But just before Monique wraps up, Prof. Shepherd, would you make available to the producers of this this program for them to
share?
My mind slips now. Those to
10
share,
point.
yes.
A 10-point action plan.
Oh, right, sure, of course.
And you just gave the rationale and the basis on which we're making the demand for reparation.
There's a PowerPoint. I have a PowerPoint presentation that I use whenever people want to understand reparation. I can make a point because all of these things are on it. The justification, the compensation payout, all of that. So I can send that to Monique. Number one.
Okay, thank you.
Right, to Monique,
Yeah.
number one, and then it will be shared with
Monique,
us in the diocese. Right, and it will be shared with the rest of us in the diocese, so much so that we can educate ourselves, you know, as to what it is that we ought to know regarding reparation, regarding our position as a church, and regarding reparation.
Happy to do that.
Right. I just want to, at this point, you know, thank our panelists as we look to put our conversation, to tie our conversation together. It has indeed been a very good conversation. It took on so many levels, and it went to so many different dimensions. Thank you very much to our panelists, Professor Verene Shepherd, Reverend Dr. Michael Clarke, Professor Veront Satchell, and Mr. Gavin Myers. Thank you all so much for coming and sharing your views and for engaging us in this conversation. And thank you too to our viewers for joining in our conversation. We do renew our request to you for sending in your comments and sending in your suggestions for topics that you think we ought to be discussing on Conversations Around the Diocese. Do remember our aims, which are to engage and provide forum for people to have open conversations around pertinent issues. It serves to navigate people in a theological and a spiritual world from an informed perspective, and to equip people to pray aright. We will not have any Bible study for the month of August. However, with our conversation in September, we will resume our Bible study sessions. We say thank you to our Zoom meeting host, Mr. Andrew Hutchinson, our social media correspondent, Reverend Garfield Campbell, and to our executive producer, Reverend Father Kirk Brown. We say thank you to the team who works behind the scenes as well. And we do encourage that you join us in our next conversation. I was your host, Monique Castle. Do be blessed. Do be emancipated.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good, restful night. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
all.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Good